we are organizing a shot heard round the world. That is, the reestablishment of Glass-Steagall represents a first step, a giant step, a revolutionary step for this nation and for humanity. And we have on our plate here, the people in this room, people like this throughout the country, we have a life and death battle over the next days. Some of you were on a conference call Thursday night, 2 nights ago, with about 200 others across the country. A national conference call out of our headquarters, which began by emphasizing the urgency of each person on that call and each person in this room taking personal responsibility for the nation, for posterity, for history. And the immediate battleground in that regard is this fight to reestablish Glass-Steagall as a first step toward a unified national and international economic recovery program, which at the same time is a prerequisite for a cultural and scientific renaissance. This Glass-Steagall is no mere banking reform. This is nothing less than retaking the sovereignty of the nation from the traitors and the usurpers, from the Aaron Burrs and Andrew Jacksons and Obamas, who have, over the history of the country, been deployed by the British Empire, by the oligarchy, on behalf of the oligarchical principle to crush the Republican principle. Glass-Steagall, at this moment of history, represents the initial step toward bringing back that Republican principle. It's the case that insofar as Glass-Steagall has been blocked explicitly as of 2010 and subsequent by Obama, the precondition for Glass-Steagall is the constitutional removal of Obama. That's a good in its own right. That's a good in many ways. But if there's to be a Glass-Steagall, if there's to be an economic reconstruction, Obama must be out. We'll get to that. We will argue that Glass-Steagall represents, this economic recovery program, which I will elaborate upon, represents the greatest shift, will represent the greatest shift of political power since the American Revolution. One of our friends high up, formerly inside the U.S. government, suggested to us that Glass-Steagall was the greatest shift of political power since Christ overthrew the Roman Empire. You might ask, how could such a seemingly simple... Wait, we're upside down. It was so good, you want to play it again? Do it right side up. You might ask how such a seemingly simple law, if you're familiar with Glass-Steagall of 1933 and what we have on the table now, how could that represent a new American Revolution? On Thursday night in this conference call, Ron Wazorek, who's a farmer from South Dakota, gave a report to begin that call. He went over to the South Dakota legislature a couple of days ago. He announced he was in the brightest red shirt he could find, sort of like that red jacket back there, this red shirt, whatever. Brightest, or the guy in the back there, in the brightest red shirt he could find, with a blue vest with some kind of tie, just to make sure no one missed him that day. And he led a small LaRouchePAC delegation, which got 30-some-odd South Dakota legislators endorsing, co-sponsoring a resolution to the U.S. Congress demanding the reenactment of Glass-Steagall. And he said in the course of his discussion Thursday night that the Glass-Steagall of 1933 was a crucial initial step toward generating Roosevelt's Four Quarters Project, Tennessee Valley Authority, the Hoover Dam, the Bonneville Dam, the St. Lawrence Seaway, toward facilitating the development of the arsenal of democracy, Detroit, the arsenal of democracy without which we would be heiling Hitler today. The Atoms for Peace program, the Interstate Highway program, the Apollo project. This all was generated, could not have been generated without Roosevelt shutting down the power of the oligarchical banksters, of the speculators of Wall Street and London who caused the Great Depression, and liberating the country and the productive power and the creative power and the labor power, the scientific know-how of the American people to generate those great achievements. Now, Glass-Steagall, which would usher in the reestablishment necessarily of the credit system of Alexander Hamilton, of Quincy Adams, of Lincoln, the Lincoln Greenback system, the Roosevelt Reconstruction Finance Corp., that by bringing back an American credit system, a national banking system, to replace the system of usury, looting, enslavement, which is the Wall Street London system, by bringing that back, we would immediately open up the potential for the greatest project on the heels of the ones from the 30s through the 60s, the greatest project ever conceived, NWAPA, North American Water and Power Lines, which in turn will generate about 6 million productive jobs in the country, essentially overnight, which will double agricultural irrigation, which will transform the science of biospheric engineering, which will revive our advanced energy flux density capability, as in nuclear fission generation, which will bring back a machine tool industry in the country, without which you don't have a productive economy, which will, you want to put up the, Bob, the land bridge and so on, which will develop our labor force, our scientific cadre, which will open up the immediate potential to develop maglev transport, magnetic levitation transport, which was pioneered at Brookhaven, patented in 1966, and shut down about the time Carter came in, such that the Germans and Japanese then developed maglev, and the Chinese have commercialized it. We just shut this down as part of the problem, which I'll get to. But the maglev, a global land bridge with maglev systems and high-speed rail systems at their spine. The red lines you see up there, that's an interesting map. Turn your head upside. Let's see. Where are we, Bob? We're here. Okay, we're there. Okay. Anyhow, where's the Bering Strait? Right there. That the project of over a century ago, a Bering Strait tunnel, a Bering Strait bridge, a Bering Strait crossing, our Russian friends, LaRouche's Russian friends, are working on such that as they are moving toward bringing to being a Bering Strait connection between North America and Asia, between Alaska and Russia, Siberia. And that is an element of what you're looking at there, a connection with the spine of that connection being the red lines are corridors of development. That is, you have high-speed and maglev rail systems. Maglev goes 300 up to 400 miles an hour. Okay, as opposed to this Amtrak over here, this jalopy over the street, which if you go 126 miles an hour in a maglev, you're taking your life in your, on the Amtrak, on the Acela, which is the best we have in this country, you're taking your life in your hands. This stuff it's being developed. We have been campaigning for this explicitly for 20 years, and it is burgeoning, it is building, especially in Asia at this point. We'll come back to that. But Glass-Steagall opens up the potential to generate the credit by which you can invest in NWAPA in these great projects. There it is, NWAPA 21, the Tennessee Valley Authority of the 21st century, 6 million jobs to start with, eventually 14 million. And to transform NASA, when Obama 3 years ago this month, 2010, said we are cutting the funding for the manned space program. At that point, LaRouche launched the campaign to impeach Obama. That moment. Because that was too far, on top of all of his other crimes. That was too far. Because if you knock out a manned space program, if you knock out any serious commitment to exploration, to discovery, to mastering this universe, then you're consigning the people of the nation, posterity, especially the youth, to hell, to no future. Having lived through the last couple of days, some of you heard about an asteroid flying by between the moon and the Earth, 17,000 miles away. And some of you perhaps heard about a meteorite exploding at, over Chelyabinsk in Russia. I'm just rethinking what was the speed? 40,000 miles an hour? 300 kilotons of power, which is 20 times that of the Hiroshima bomb, of the atomic bomb. That happened yesterday. We are defenseless in the face of that. We're absolutely, a century ago, the biggest of these things that hit Earth in the recent history hit over Siberia, Tunguska. It was about twice the size of this thing, and it hit the Earth and knocked out 820 square miles of forest. It wiped it out. We are defenseless without what the Russians have initiated, strategic defense of Earth. The LaRouche movement is sponsoring an extraordinary conference on the 23rd of March on strategic defense of Earth, which builds from what LaRouche broke through on with Reagan's announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative 30 years ago this March. We can come back to this. But we're talking about man's mastery of this universe. That's the subject. That's the issue. This is impossible, and the security of the planet is impossible without a first necessary step, Glass-Steagall. You do this, you transform the identity, the mission, the potential for human existence, the potential for a humanist identity, by which I mean an identity based on the creative power of human beings, the productive power of our people, as opposed to an identity of money and pleasure-seeking and whatever you feel like doing, regardless of the fact that the species is facing extinction from a number of things. For the first time in 50 years, after the last 50 years of decay, we have the potential and the existential necessity of bringing back an immortal mission for our people. So what we're looking at is a new paradigm of progress, of science, of a recommitment to posterity. Okay. So your job, the job of those of us in this room, is to bring this into being. We have a problem on this. We have an enemy, which enemy dominates world finance, world media, manipulates the thinking of populations worldwide, dominates raw materials, so on and so forth. That enemy, properly called the British Empire, the oligarchical system, the oligarchical principle, the globalist system, that enemy is at war with LaRouche, with this movement, with humanity. And LaRouche addressed this in a webcast that hopefully some of you saw last night. You got the... Yeah. Bob, the webcast. This is Lyndon LaRouche last night.
The point is that, as in the Schuck case, remember Hjalmar Schuck was operating under the authority of the Bank of England. So that in a sense, that was the same mechanism which I'm talking about now, except the circumstances are different. At that point, the British managed, with the support of the United States, with the Wall Street crowd, managed to support Adolf Hitler. That's what they did. They made some adjustments later, but that's what they did. Now you've got a situation in which the degree of hyperinflation, which presently exists, especially in the transatlantic system, but throughout the world at large, the entire system is now hyperinflated to the point that it can no longer continue to exist on its present books. In other words, this is a doomsday situation. Now, for me, it's not a doomsday situation because I know, okay, if we cancel all this worthless money, cancel all this worthless debts, gambling debts, Barry Bernanke or whatever, if we do that, then we can survive. We will then be able to survive if we do two things. First of all, we have to install Glass-Steagall immediately. If you don't include Glass-Steagall immediately, you're not a patriot of the United States. You may think you are, but you're not in reality. The only way we can save the United States in some reasonable way and save and protect the people of the United States is to install Glass-Steagall now. Anyone who doesn't do that is a traitor to the United States, whether they intend that or not. Because there is no solution for the people of the United States without Glass-Steagall. Because the hyperinflation which has been built up in the transatlantic system is so enormous, there's no ability in the world at large to continue to sustain it. This is a breakdown system. And that's the issue. Now, at that point, you say, well, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to get rid of that worthless money, those worthless debts. They're not honest debts. They're gambling debts. There was no purchase of anything. It was gambling. They went into a gambling game, like the board game of, famous board game. And it's a gambling game. They're gambling debts. They're not debts on the basis of product, of producing something. They're not claims on reality. They're gambling debts. So the gambling debts are so large. So what are we going to do with the gambling debts? We'll cancel them. If they are gambling debts, cancel them. And then put Glass-Steagall into effect. Now, Glass-Steagall, as people should know, has two features. One is the features which are known, which is a memory of Franklin Roosevelt's actions. But we're now in a different situation, a far different situation. Glass-Steagall is still the only thing that works. But it doesn't work by itself anymore. Why? Because the amount of credit in the system is so small, even after you strip off all the fake money, the fake debts, that you don't have enough to keep an economy going. So therefore you have to have a credit system which will supply employment, productive employment, for enough people on the basis of a credit system. That means you have to actually create government-controlled credit. Government control, I say, because it's not just government credit, it's government-controlled credit for useful projects, to employ people, get them to produce things which are necessary, important. In other words, to have an actual productive employment approach. And that would, within, say, a generation, or at most 2 generations, we would have created in the United States, the greatest system of economy the world has ever seen. Now they have the alternative. They can go to hell, and that's where they'll go if they continue to oppose Glass-Steagall, because the debts of this nation, the hyperinflation of debt in this nation, is such that no one can sustain this as long as that obligation, or those so-called nominal obligations, are upheld. There just simply is not enough means to sustain this. It's now at a point of blowout. Now, the point is, what you say, well, these are gambling debts. Well, just what do you do in a case like that? The nation cancels the gambling debts per se. You cancel. We don't recognize gambling debts anymore. We said it was a mistake to do it in the first place. But those are, what we're talking about is the defense of gambling debts, not debts on the basis of production or goods purchased. In other words, they're fake debts. They're debts which, under a moral principle, should never have been allowed. We're eating people's bodies. We're eating their children. We're killing them with these policies. And policies which are being supported by or condoned by members of the Senate and House of Representatives, by a bunch of stinking cowards called our representatives, our congressional representatives. Stinking cowards who won't stand up to defend the human species against the worst travesty ever conceived. So the time has come. Either mankind has the moral capability of fitness to survive, or mankind, including our mankind, is going to lose the fitness to survive. And that will come very soon. We're now on the very edge of the explosion. Glass-Steagall now or go to hell. Those are your two choices.
Now, he referenced the stinking cowardice in the Congress. In his prior response in this webcast last night, he reemphasizes that what we're looking for is maybe 5% of the Congress and 5% of the American population who will not act as stinking cowards at this juncture of history. And he says, I wanted to show this, but for time reasons. He says most of them are go along to get along members of Congress. Go along to get along. The same old refrain which leads us down to the pathway right into hell. And he says, we're now at a point where the American people who are trying to behave like gutless wonders, especially those in the Congress and similar places, where they're trying to hide from the issues, which is what they do best. They can always take an issue and bounce it around from session to session and accomplish nothing. But it comes up like Grandpa every time, and he never does anything. Grandpa just chomps on his corncob pipe and sits there and puffs, and sessions of Congress go and come. He remains there puffing on his pipe, and nothing is done. Okay, well, it's up to us to take the pipe away and get this stuff done. He further referenced this hyperinflationary explosion. Do we have the Bill Gross? Bill Gross is the head of president or something of PIMCO. It's one of these pimps. PIMCO is the largest bond trading company in the world. And he appeared with this article on his website a few days ago, Credit Supernova. That is referring to a supernova-style explosion of the international financial system. Gross writes, said, ever since the explosive decoupling of the dollar from gold in 1971, that you have the credit outstanding in this country, which totaled at that point about $3 trillion. Today, at $56 trillion and counting, it is a monster that requires perpetually increasing amounts of fuel, a supernova star that expands and expands, yet in the process begins to consume itself. That's the hyperinflationary process which LaRouche has emphasized for years, which is now appearing in the house organs of this financial establishment, like that. So what LaRouche referenced in the course of this webcast is that the system, the U.S. and international financial system, is finished. It is a massively bankrupt system. It's been sustained, so to speak, for 5 years with an infusion of what's called bailout money, which is something like $30 trillion coming from the Federal Reserve, the U.S. government, the European Central Bank, and so on over the last 5 years. That, insofar as those tens of trillions are not going into anything useful, productive, therefore, this money, by definition, is hyperinflationary. It's sitting there, parked at banks, at the Fed, and so on, and that supernova is what the informed, the cognoscenti within the financial crowd understand is in process. Their system is finished. What they intend to do is to write off their gambling debts and establish a new system, a much smaller system, which they fully control, and they write off through genocidal policy, destruction of agriculture, massive food shortage, spread of disease, what you have occurring across Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, into Ireland, and spreading across Europe, what's building in this country. You're looking at a program of mass genocide, like that of Hjalmar Schacht, LaRouche referenced, Hitler's finance minister. Is the creation of some new currency, as was done in Germany in 1933, called Mefo bills, which were tied to slave labor, as opposed to NWAPA, as opposed to space exploration, as opposed to posterity. A former senior Treasury Department official told a friend of ours in the last week or two, this is in terms of how hot this fight is. He said, do not talk about Glass-Steagall. Because if the mere mention of Glass-Steagall at this supercharged moment will cause the system to collapse. That is their system, meaning Wall Street, London, this system of speculators, investment banks, derivatives traders, and so on, who are spitting on humanity, who have been shutting down the physical economy increasingly, since at least 1971. So there's massive pressure on Congress. There are threats on Congress. However, once you swear the oath as a member of Congress to the U.S. Constitution, those threats need to be pushed aside, and you have a constitutional mandate. You have a responsibility. I'll come to this when we get to the preamble of the Constitution, a responsibility to the nation, to posterity. And what we've got at most is 5%. We have to activate that 5% within the Congress, and that depends heavily on what people here do. Now, we've organized a juggernaut going back to the blow-up of the system in July of 2007, when the first financial explosions of this period occurred. We had 85 co-sponsors on a Glass-Steagall bill in the last session, H.R. 1489. This is on go to the LaRouchePAC website, to the Glass-Steagall page, and this is rather remarkable when you go through it. These are hundreds, it's 85 congressmen who've signed on to that bill, and it's hundreds and hundreds of institutions, of city councils across the country, of state legislative bodies, of freeholder bodies, unions, realtors, farmer organizations, media endorsements, people in this room. Some of the teachers in this room organized the United Federation of Teachers in New York City, the big teachers union, to endorse this. That's in here. Dawn and Jessica in particular Robert organized the AFT nationally, the American Federation of Teachers. Diane and I worked on the AFL-CIO of New Jersey, which endorsed this, 10 state AFL organizations. I mean, we have a juggernaut on this thing, which Obama and the Wall Street control over both parties blocked 1489 from passage. In the first moments of the new session on January 3rd, we put in, our friends, Capter, Democrat, and Jones, Republican, put in H.R. 129. You'll see, if you picked up stuff at the table, you'll see the details on this. And what we're working on immediately are to get the 85 co-sponsors to get 85 and to get 185 and then 285, at which point we've got the bill. That is to challenge everything on Capitol Hill. On the House side, to get a Senate companion bill, and so on and so forth. And that's the task that I'm addressing with everyone in the room. When we finish, we'll take up what people are doing on this or not, what questions people have about it, what fears people have about it, which is very important, and what we need to do on this. But you have, well, all sorts of things are breaking loose on this at this point. But what I want to get at is that the intent here is to mobilize to force action. As FDR said early on, action and action now. I mean, we all have to be better because we can't fail. And since we're dealing with gutless wonders on Capitol Hill and so on, we have to break through it on this. So I want to take up a little a brief introduction to the nature of Glass-Steagall and the credit system, the WAPA, the full economic program. I'm going to go through it in a couple of minutes. I hope everyone here got this pamphlet. If not, we'll pass it out when we get to it. That is, where's my pamphlet? The economic program pamphlet that you should have gotten when you came in. Yeah, that's the pamphlet back there. Anyhow, when I get to it, make sure you'll all have it. And I want to get at first the nature of LaRouche's science. LaRouche has been involved in economic forecasting since 1956. And he has not made a mistake in his medium-term and long-term forecasts since then. It's a good track record. And there is a science here. So let's do it this way. Do you want to do the Apollo project? The website? Okay, put the website up for a second. This is, some of you were at a conference in Manhattan at the Riverside Church 3 weeks ago. Riverside Church is famously the location of Martin Luther King's speech, April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was assassinated, in which he broke with the liberal establishment. And insisted that the war in Vietnam had to be opposed and shut down. And he used the famous expression, the fierce urgency of now. That the current, take the current when it serves. The fierce urgency of now. I emphasize that in terms of what's on our plate here. But at that conference, this was the second in a series of conferences of the Schiller Institute to establish a new paradigm for the survival of civilization. This is the website, which you can link right to from the LaRouchePAC site or go, it's called newparadigm.schillerinstitute.com. On the top left is an interesting congressman who apparently has more guts than most of these guys put together. It's Representative Walter Jones, the Republican from North Carolina, the military area, who's written more letters to families who've lost young men and women in Afghanistan and Iraq than maybe any congressman. And he's totally anguished about this. And he brought Congressman Rangel, the Democrat from New York, together at a press conference which we organized in December. Rangel and Jones. Very interesting combination. Jones addressed our conference via video. And he said these two bills, the Glass-Steagall bill, which he is the Republican co-sponsor of with Democrat Marcy Kaptur, and H.C.R. 3, which says that if a president launches offensive war without congressional authorization, that president is carrying out an impeachable crime, which Jones put up at our insistence last year and renewed this year to stop Obama from bringing American forces into Syria in some fashion, which instantaneously could provoke U.S.-Russian confrontation and the potential for thermonuclear war. So anyhow, he addressed that at the conference and asked everyone at that conference to mobilize. So I'm carrying forward his request and asking all of you to mobilize. Because the deeper conception here is that we are working internationally to establish a new paradigm for humanity out of the rot of the last 50 years.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
60 seconds. Lights on. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow.
Stand
4 forward.
30.
4 forward, drift into the right a little.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Forward, just contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the LEM now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All this is possible only through the blood, sweat, and tears of a number of people. The American workmen who put these pieces of machinery together at the factory. Second, the painstaking work done by the various test teams during the assembly and the retest after assembly. And finally, the people at the Manned Spacecraft Center, both in management, in mission planning, in flight control, and last but not least, in crew training. This operation is somewhat like the periscope of a submarine. All you see is the three of us, but beneath the surface are thousands and thousands of others. And to all those, I would like to say thank you very much.
This is Wernher von Braun, probably the greatest mind at NASA, who in the 60s forecast and proposed a plan for a post-Apollo program, as you see, 1970, 1990. And you'll notice, Bob can probably identify just one element of it, for example, down there in 1980 to 84, the Mars section, planetary, right there. Manned Mars landing between 1980 1984. And the next one to the right of that, what does it say?
Temporary base 12 men.
Temporary base 12 men.
48 men on surface, 24 men in orbit.
Okay, so that was supposed to occur,
That's 1987.
okay, between 70 and 90, at the end of the Apollo project, which ended in the early 70s. That was supposed to happen. That was what was mapped out by the minds who got Armstrong and company to the moon in '69. Had we done that, then we would have the capability today to figure out the system of asteroids, which the number of rocks up there is in the millions. And we know, NASA, the Russian scientists may know 1/10 of 1% or 1% of what's up there because we shut that down. Because the paradigm through into 1963, typified by the Apollo project of Kennedy, an American and international commitment to progress, to scientific progress, to frontiers, to new frontier, to exploration and discovery, to the tradition of Columbus. That was the greatness of America, which transformed my generation, and then it was shot. And the shot was covered up. And we went to hell, beginning in '63, so that, of course, never happened. By '71, the system of sovereign nation states, organized by Roosevelt at the Bretton Woods Conference, 1944, the post-war Bretton Woods system, which was intended to develop the world physically, much as we did coming out of Depression. That system was shut down August 15th, 1971, with the connection, the gold-backed dollar, crucial element of that system. That is a fixed exchange rate amongst currencies, so sovereign nations could cooperate to develop and trade and build. That was shut down in '71. LaRouche uniquely forecast that event. I met LaRouche the next day, August 16th, 1971, because he had forecast this, and when it happened, it was like on campuses and elsewhere amongst us young guys back then, this was a bombshell, and the movement took off. This guy, LaRouche, was right, uniquely. There's a method here. The key to this method is the recognition of the unique distinction between man and beast, which is to say human beings have a capacity, a creative capacity, to foresee the future, not through gazing in crystal balls or betting on a horse track or something, but to conceptualize, to hypothesize alternate pathways for the future, to actually access where the future will be depending on what you do about it. Now, let me ask Bob to just go to the firewall. This is a video. You're looking at Lower Manhattan. It's a video that we did 5 years ago, or about 5 years ago. Is it going, Bob? Yeah, let it go, let it go. It's called Firewall, in defense of the nation state, in defense of sovereign nation state, in defense of the republic. This is, well, you'll see.
In mid-2007, the global financial system exploded. Newspaper headlines and television sets across the country resounded with reports of what was soon widely referred to as the subprime mortgage crisis. The abysmal losses of Countrywide Financial and American Home Mortgage became the talk of the town almost overnight. The failure was not of pieces of the system, however, but of the system itself. This was not an unforeseen event. Several days before the reports of crisis burst into the news, economist Lyndon LaRouche delivered an international address signifying the close of the post-FDR global financial and monetary system.
There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. It's finished now. The present financial system cannot continue to exist under any circumstances, under any presidency, under any leadership, or any leadership of nations. Only a fundamental and sudden change in the world monetary financial system will prevent a general, immediate, chain reaction type of collapse. At what speed, we don't know, but it will go on, and it will be unstoppable. And the longer it goes on, before coming to an end, the worse things will get.
In the ensuing period, though the media frenzy had appeared to dissipate, the terror in the financial world did not. Rather than following LaRouche's initiative to break from the failing system and support his Homeowners and Bank Protection Act, federal leaders, under pressure from Wall Street, clung to measures which would only prolong the death throes of the financial system until the end of the year, at the expense of the population. Upon the arrival of the new year, in the aftermath of further unprecedented money-pumping measures taken by central banks around the globe at the behest of City of London financiers, political solutions began to surface left and right. Presidential candidates, elected officials, and economists raced to reveal their stimulus packages, further perpetuating the bailout of the already bankrupt system. On January 17th, 6 months after his assessment of the end of the world financial system, LaRouche again spoke out above the clamor, identifying the full scope and implications of the crisis.
Each day now, since January 3rd, the crisis has been expanding in magnitude at an accelerating rate. What you think is the extent of the crisis today is the measures I propose are not taken will become much worse by an order of magnitude on the next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, until the whole system grinds into a collapse, probably sometime during this year. And I'm talking about a global collapse, not a collapse just of the transatlantic English-speaking community.
And Son, are you on the phone with us?
I am on the phone, Joe, yes.
The following week ended in the last hurrah of the Federal Reserve, a drastic cut in the interest rates, a clear move of utter desperation. LaRouche identified this as the culminating event of a commitment made by the transatlantic English-speaking world toward a new phase of crisis, a chain reaction of global hyperinflationary collapse, comparable to that which struck Germany in 1923, terminating in the fascist regimes of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. In this presentation, we shall unfold to the viewer the process by which we have come to such a point in history, and how we may rise to the occasion of regaining America's proper role in the world, rather than shrinking into littleness and watching as the great experiment of our founding fathers is relegated to the dustbin of history as the world enters a new dark age. We urge the viewer to watch as if his future depended on it, because in a very real sense, it does.
The entire firewall video is available back there. This is LaRouche speaking July 25th, 2007. You all heard about Bear Stearns in March of 2008, and AIG and Merrill Lynch and Lehman Brothers in September of 2008 and the beginning bailout. How does, what's the method by which the scientist, LaRouche, knows this and is able to to act on it? The key to the method is absolutely not statistics. The key to the method is a conception of identity, of the nature of man and the identity of the individual who chooses to take responsibility for mankind, for history, which is really my subject here. That is, if you have the passion for children, the passion for Africa, America, the passion for posterity, then you say, what the hell are we going to do? Unless you're blind, you see what's going on around you, what's been going on for a long time, for 50 years, or the last 5 years, and you say, what do we do about it? Well, to know what to do about it, you have to have a conception of the future. You have to actually know or experience the future before it occurs. And that is a capacity which we all have, which he manifests. If you approach these matters as, que sera, sera, I mean, we're all victims, aren't we? We're little people. I mean, we're just... If you approach this from the standpoint of a slave mentality, a victim mentality, which has been imposed and by and large imposed by this oligarchy and accepted by most Americans as their identity, if you allow that to be your identity, we're finished. Then there's no way you're not interested in the future. You figure the future is just an extrapolation linearly from the past. And that's just going to happen. There's some, powers that be which will impose the future, and what can you do about it? That's not LaRouche's identity. That's not the identity of our movement. Think about this asteroid business. Are we stuck? I mean, it is the case. If a big one hits the planet, the planet's wiped out. We do not have defense now against that. It does not exist. Do we have the potential to develop such defenses? We do. That's what we're working on in this movement. That's what this conference is about next month. Okay, so the question of forecasting is primarily a question of a passion for humanity, is the idea of an immortal mission in which you recognize your own soul, your own immortal soul, and it's that soul which lives beyond the grave. And you then adopt a mission to act on this reality. Can you do the triple curve, double curve? And I want you to stop it at the inflection points. Stop it. Okay, so you have three curves. This is a function which LaRouche developed in 1995, where he's taking three parameters. The aggregate of all debt, financial aggregates, all debt in the, let's say, the U.S. system, derivatives and stocks and every form of debt, government debt, mortgage debt. The monetary aggregate is all the money in the system, which presumably has to be there to service the debt, to pay the debt. And then the physical economy, which is what we're mostly interested in here, which is, what's that, Bob? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The red is the debt, the yellow is the monetary, and the blue is the financial economy, input, output. If you notice, the function begins essentially in 1966 or thereabouts. You notice the three things are sort of close together. In the 60s, they were still close together before this paradigm of decay and deindustrialization and genocide took over. So they're diverging. Next, Bob. Stop it. Okay. What does it say? The system reaches a critical point of instability. What's that? 2000? What's the date? 2000. Year 2000. So if you remember, the dot-com bubble blew up, and a lot of other things blew up about the year 2000. What's happening is that the money supply is growing at a rate faster than this debt, which is growing at a pretty fast rate. Meanwhile, the foundation to service the debt is the physical economy. It's productive output. It's the productive employment of the population, which among other things generates tax revenue to pay government debt, and so on and so forth. But these three parameters are now diverging at an accelerating rate. Last part, Bob. The system disintegrates. What's that say, 2007? Yep. And keep going. Notice the red, the debt structure crashes. That's what you saw happen 2007, 2008, and since. And that's what LaRouche was talking about in that webcast last night. The debt is, you know, it went from $3 trillion in U.S., I don't know, talking about bank debt, $3 trillion to $56 trillion. We're talking about derivatives, which are 1,500 trillion.
Can we get, I mean, is there a way of getting this?
Yes.
Talking to people with economic backgrounds, they would get this more than...
Well, the ones with economic backgrounds probably won't get it. But if you talk to the...
If you can show it in black and white.
Yeah. No, we'll come back to that. It's all available on our website, and I'll tell you how to... But anyhow, the point is that this wild accumulation of debt, which needs a growth of the money pumped into the system by the Federal Reserve, which is not supposed to create money, that's what this bailout business in the last 5 years is, that yellow thing just continuing to soar to the ceiling, to the stratosphere. Meanwhile, the debt structure has already crashed, and the crash is accelerating, and the productive economy, productive employment, it's wiped out. That's what defines the hyperinflationary crisis, and that's why when LaRouche took these parameters, that's why he could say that the system is bankrupt, the system is finished. Okay, give me the next video, quick. Leandra there. Oh, the double curve. Thank you, Bob. Okay, go. It says LaRouche's healthy economy function. Right, there are only two curves. Is that the red is the financial aggregates, which is the credit system I was talking about before, which Alexander Hamilton created, and which we last saw with Roosevelt and to some degree with Kennedy, is that you're issuing credit, debt, but you're investing it in the physical economy. So it's tied to water development and power and transport and production, food. Therefore, you only need the two parameters. You don't need this, you don't need the yellow thing there, which is that the money supply. The money is only relevant as it's credit invested for the future. Since you know if you don't invest for the future, you're not going to have a future. So, okay, do the video.
Publicly in his January 1996 announcement of his candidacy for president, Lyndon LaRouche presented the world with the only accurate long-term forecast of the present economic breakdown, the triple curve forecast. That triple curve, expressed by three separate but dynamically interrelated processes, demonstrates a typical collapse function through the decline of the planet's physical economic capital and output per capita and per square kilometer, the rise of financial aggregates, and the rise of monetary aggregates. This reaches a point where the monetary factor overtakes the financial, and you begin to experience acute successive phases of collapse. These three separate curves express a single unified process governing the whole. That process is monetarism, or simply imperialism. It has now been over a decade since Lyndon LaRouche first introduced that forecast, and the failure to recognize it as the only competent method for forecasting has been the leading cause of the present threatened disintegration of the world monetary and financial system. Now, if radical changes are not made within the United States along the lines of a competent understanding of that triple curve forecast, you will not be able to save this country. Look at the process. Start by getting off on the wrong foot. Impose an arbitrary monetary value, like a debt, onto the system. Issue some claims to money. Not money earmarked for specific purposes, just money. Now, to pay off that monetary value, you begin tying it to legitimate things: mortgages, plants, factories, state funds. And when you want to access that money, you take it. You sell the homeowner's debt. You sell the factory, perhaps you ship it overseas, scale back the cost to maintain it, and make more money off legitimate financial claims. But while you're making that money, you're also collapsing the physical basis to reproduce your economy through self-cannibalization. And you're handing over your sovereignty when you no longer produce in your own country the goods you consume, but rely on an international cartel middleman to handle production and trade. Call that globalization. So as the effects of this looting scheme are felt in crisis after crisis, the decision is then made by the wizards of finance who have magical powers that you puny mortals cannot even imagine, that the way to bring about an economic recovery is with more money. So it was by 1987 that Alan Greenspan unleashed financial derivatives, a now quadrillion-dollar debt attached to the dollar, in response to the '87 crash. Now you could make money without having an honest claim to goods. You could gamble with imaginary chips and come out with billions of dollars. By 1999, now President Obama's triple-chinned, single-witted economic advisor acted to repeal the Glass-Steagall legislation, opening the banking system to chaos. And by the year 2000, under successive years of almost unfathomable economic incompetence, those derivatives and other Wall Street and similar monetary claims had exceeded the financial claims in the economy. This set the course for the disintegration of the system, which came in 2007, when George Bush and the Congress, led by Barney Frank, Nancy Pelosi, and Chris Dodd, mustered together all their collective brain power and led the now $23 trillion hyperinflationary charge to bail out the monetarist claims. It is this process shown in the triple curve that, if continued into the present month of October, will drive not only the United States, but the global dollar-based world economy into a new phase of collapse only comparable in its effects to the hyperinflationary blowout of Weimar Germany in the spring through fall of 1923. Of course, the irony of today's situation is that while the conditions are far worse and farther reaching than they were in Germany, the possibility for survival is greater. Our enemy is the same international imperial monetarist alliance, but we in the United States can take them on in a way Germany never could. We write off the debt. We have placed a $23 trillion burden on our people. The claims to that money have sucked our industry dry, and in the last 4 years we have shut down and sold for scrap our previously most productive sectors, throwing millions of Americans out of work. There is no way to keep up with the claims to money, which President Obama would sacrifice lives to pay. So write off the debt. Take the monetary factor of the triple curve and cut it off. There are legitimate claims to money within the system that must be sorted out. All debts tied to real economic activity, obligations to the states, personal accounts, Social Security, and large business and agricultural loans will be honored. And to the extent the values of these legitimate claims have been polluted by the inflated monetary factor, they will be reassessed. But anything that looks like a derivative or a gambling debt, or any arbitrary claim to money, we separate out of our banking institutions and remove them from the public accounts to be placed in a burn pile. Cancel the debt, and do it according to constitutional law. Because what the government has committed itself to as a monetary debt operates on rules outside of the nation's control over our economy and finances. That is the definition of monetarism. So you restrict all transactions in money to the uttering of credit by the government, as is prescribed explicitly in our Constitution. Anything that does not conform to that constitutional standard, we cancel. It's illegal. The monetary inflation has to be depleted in one fell swoop of bankruptcy reorganization under a Glass-Steagall standard. Your monetary values vanish, but your legitimate financial values will remain. Without doing that, you can't get down to the real values. So cancel the debt. Cancel the purely monetary burden on the economy, and with the cooperation of other leading nations who have the same intention to survive, shut down the world's monetary system. Make it illegal, and cancel all claims based on purely monetary holdings. In only that way can you save the world from a worse fate than Weimar 1923, a long dark age. When you have understood that solution as a moral issue, then what you have to do is clear. Cancel all monetary claims using a Glass-Steagall standard. That's the way you clean this mess up.
Now this gets real interesting, because you might get nervous and say, well, my mother told me you always pay my debts. We have to pay the debts. How can we just get rid of debts? Who decides who gets paid and who doesn't get paid? I mean, you know, who's going to make those decisions? And here we get to the fundamental question of economics, which is what's value? Is money value? That money would do you a lot of good if that asteroid hit. Well, all that money you're storing up under your bed or in your bank or your investments is going to do you a lot of good. What's that? Some morals? That's exactly what I'm getting at. Thank you. I'm coming to that. That's the point. The question is, it used to be through into the 60s that there was a connection between economics and morality. This was, we called it the Glass-Steagall standard. This was all broken after Kennedy was shot and the cover-up occurred. And we said, we're going to take money to speculate with. Money is purely a means of making money through financial activity, gambling. And we built up, beginning back then, especially in '71, when we separated the money from the physical economy, from fixed exchange rate, we allowed the system to go into this wild acceleration of debt and monetary claims, and simultaneously we shut down this productive economy. If you say that money is accepted as value, then there's no distinction between $1 million, which might be invested in scientific development, space exploration, nuclear power, productive activity, as against $1 million invested in drugs, prostitution, gambling. What's the difference? Say $1 million. If you say that money is the metric of value. This is a principle called British liberalism, philosophically, historically. It's all a kind of hedonism, pleasure-pain calculus. It's all about pleasure and avoiding pain. Well, that's what, animals are interested in that. Human beings have a capacity to create and to foresee the consequences of their action, and therefore to act in the interest of posterity, in the interest of what we call in our preamble the general welfare of our people. Bob, the preamble. You're all familiar with this. This is the guiding principle of the U.S. Constitution. This is the essence of the Constitution is that. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the USA. What Quincy Adams and Lincoln and Roosevelt, what the great presidents did, as opposed to these clunkers or traitors, what they did was they acted constitutionally based on that principle. That's what the Glass-Steagall represents, as against what took over in the 60s and subsequent. It's all about my money, my investments, my pleasure. So speculation became primary, and the future, posterity, the well-being of the people, the general welfare principle, thrown out the window. And that reaches its nadir, or height, depending on how you look at it, in these last 5 years, when the powers that be, through the Bush administration and the Obama administration, through Greenspan and Bernanke, and so on in Europe, insisted that the debt must be honored. What debt? The gambling debt, this derivatives debt, which is something like $1,500 trillion. Anybody know what $1 trillion is? I mean, that's what's been built up as a metastasizing cancer in the world financial system over 40 years, especially since Greenspan's tenure, especially since around 99, when the Glass-Steagall law was eliminated, was repealed, and the floodgates opened up for the speculation. So the speculative assets in the system, which were by one count, about $200 trillion in 1997, well over a quadrillion as of a year or two ago. And what's happened is that in the U.S., working with figures like $17 trillion to feed the cancer, the bailout, government money, Federal Reserve money pumping, your money, $17 trillion pumped in to save the gambling debt, to save the swindlers, while the physical economy has crashed. And now Obama says, Obama and his Republican friends say, let's take $4 trillion out of what? Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, education, investment in science, NASA, you name it. That's where this process has led us. Okay, pick up this. Everybody have this? Anybody not have this? Can someone at the back table grab a few and just pass them out real quick? I'm trying to finish by 3:35. I'm going quick, cutting this out. I mean, again, what I'm describing is the historical distinction, the historical conflict between the American system of political economy, which was created by Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, and the British system, the imperial system, the globalist looting system of enslavement and genocide. That what the American system is enshrined in those principles, and you measure the health of that system by the investment of credit to advance the general welfare of the people and of posterity, by the development of scientific capacity to defend the planet from what's up there, as opposed to the metric which you hear about in the business news and financial experts all the time, which is, where's the stock market? What's my investments worth? And so on and so forth. That's the crucial distinction. And since the system is now finished, we have to reorganize in this way. So if you look at this, your assignment as of tonight and subsequent is to actually work through, I'm an old teacher too, work through this. This is a masterpiece. To open the inside cover, George Washington, letter to the legislature of Pennsylvania, 1789. It should be the highest ambition of every American to extend his views beyond himself. This is the inside cover. And to bear in mind that his conduct will not only affect himself, his country, and his immediate posterity, but that its influence may be coextensive with the world and stamp political happiness or misery on ages yet unborn. That's Washington's statement of your immortality and your responsibility to ages, to billions yet unborn. How do you achieve that? Well, he and Hamilton created this system. You start turning pages, a single national program to save the United States. That statement, which is beautiful, is out in leaflet form, the introduction there. Then if you go to page 6, first, restore Glass-Steagall. By restoring Glass-Steagall, we declare the U.S. government has no obligation to bail out bankers' gambling debts. If you look at page 6, for time reasons I won't read it, but read it. Go through it. You'll see, in the simplest terms, how Glass-Steagall works. Then jump over to the section on page 14, H.R. 129, the Return to Prudent Banking Act, which is the 14, which is the statement of how the Glass-Steagall legislation, which is now pending, works. Then the next, return to national banking. And what you'll see there is a beautiful discussion in brief of the national banking work, breakthroughs of Hamilton, Quincy Adams, Lincoln, and then Roosevelt. And then finally, build NWAPA 21 on page 28 in terms of this idea of NWAPA, which was put forward in 1964 by the Parsons Engineering Company, such that had Kennedy lived, we would have built NWAPA in the 1960s. Okay, so why don't we do it this way? This program is decisive to to usher in a new paradigm for humanity, as against the last 50 years. Why don't we take the last video, Bob?
Right now, the United States is dominated by a hyperinflationary swindle. And this has been going on ever since the cancellation of the Glass-Steagall program in the first place. Now, we now have a situation where most of the money outside, listed in banks and so forth, is worthless. It is already worthless. It's worthless by virtue of hyperinflation, which has now come to a certain limit. We have to shut it down. Now, most of those banks, which we have to shut off from Glass-Steagall program, will go bankrupt. They will evaporate. Most of their funds will disappear. Their incomes will disappear. But that's inevitable. It's either save the people or save swindlers. And I think the time has come. The swindlers had more than had their time. Now's the time for the people. Now, the problem here is this. If we take the total banking system, including the legitimate banking system as compared with the illegitimate banking system, what has happened is the legitimate banking system has been cut off from the income which it should have enjoyed or which it should have participated. So therefore, if we want to start a recovery of the United States economy, we have to take an additional measure. We have to introduce a new system, a credit system, which will be a function of the United States government, and the credit system will be used primarily to conduit funds through their system, through the Glass-Steagall system and the banking system, for worthy investments supported by the U.S. government.
So we're moving from a system where money is moved and multiplied rapidly and indiscriminately, like the wheels of a car stuck in the mud, to a system of federal credit, where the objective is to create the most traction from each investment. What conditions in the economy would create the most traction? What kinds of investments would be considered worthy? Under every period of U.S. history, when we use some approximation of the original credit national banking system of Alexander Hamilton, leaders in the federal government agreed to take on a debt long-term to initiate the kind of growth that improves not merely household incomes, but the overall productivity and productive value of the nation and society as a whole. The LaRouchePAC updated proposal for the construction of the Continental Water and Resource Managing System, NWAPA 21, is precisely the vehicle to transform a federal debt into an asset of virtually incalculable value, actual value. The NWAPA 21 system begins to be realized through federally directed loans and discounts to those individuals and industries tasked with the job of transferring 72 million acre-feet per year of runoff water from Alaska, British Columbia, and Yukon to the United States Southwest and Mexico for the long-term needs of agriculture, industry, and the improvement of the lives of the people of the North American continent. This unleashing of credit and national improvement must be understood as one in the same process as implementing Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall stops the bleeding, but does not in itself avert economic collapse or create economic growth. Glass-Steagall facilitates the beginnings of a banking system where U.S. producers can be assured access to stable, long-term, federally backed credit over many years. They can be confident that the credit will be available to accomplish the work that the nation so desperately needs in constructing large-scale projects like NWAPA 21, repairing economic infrastructure, recreating a U.S. manufacturing base, and producing food, among our most urgent tasks. Putting the physical economy of the United States back in order will take more than adding your name to a list of co-sponsors. It means a complete revolution in understanding the economy, overturning the long-held Anglo-American delusion that the economy is the aggregate of individuals' greedy self-interest, to an understanding of the entire economic process. This begins, of course, with H.R. 129 in the House and a companion Glass-Steagall bill introduced in the Senate and passed through both houses of Congress with a veto-proof majority.